You can have fruit or cereal.
No, I want no.
Why do you want a fever? You want a fever because sister has a fever? You had a fever for 2 weeks already.
But I want a fever again. I want a fever.
You're not okay?
No.
You want a snack?
Yes.
Food?
Yes.
You okay?
Yeah, I
You fine?
did. Yes.
See, it's cute when other people's kids throw fits. It's not so cute when it's your kids or it's adults. A National Institute of Health survey of 34,000 adults revealed that 7.8% of the U.S. population has experienced inappropriate, intense, or poorly controlled anger. Specifically, anger that was triggered by small things or that was difficult to control. Frequent temper outburst or anger that led to a loss of control, or hitting people or throwing objects in anger. Almost 10% of Americans lose their temper to the point that they lose control. See, we live in an angry and offended society. In the last 12 months, the pressure of politics and the pandemic has pushed people to the breaking point. Usually rational people became violently angry. Families were divided. Friendships were lost. Cable news only added to the fury. Instead of pretending to actually report the news, they fill the airways with angry, yelling rants. And some people sit and listen to that all day long. Not only do they blindly accept it as truth, the rage affects them. If you fill your home with the sounds of anger, it's inevitable that you will become angry. Social media is the new battleground. We've watched people that we would consider to be reasonable, gentle followers of Jesus turn into maniacal monsters on Facebook. And I've watched people that I would consider unreasonable go nuclear with their anger. People get angry and they lose their temper at politicians, at preachers, at the police, at doctors, at the media, at the clerks at Walmart, at waiters, at delivery drivers, their kids, their spouse, and then this week, the gas prices and the CDC. Our society has been reduced to anger, temper tantrums, broken relationships, and public fights. It has been increasingly sad to watch. I feel like it is time for a national day of kindness, or like a national day of hug, or a law that you have got to be kind and say nice things to people. See, it's not just society. The last 14 months have exposed the American church as immature, entitled, and nowhere near ready for persecution. Churches have been caught up in arguments over face masks and vaccines and racism and politics. The list goes on and on. The pressure of 2020 revealed immaturity and ugliness in people who claim to be God's children. Followers of Jesus fought and argued not over eternal things, but over earthly things. I've watched as disagreements have grown to the place where supposed followers of Jesus question the salvation of anyone who dared to disagree with their position. See, the church in America wasted one of the greatest opportunities that it's had in the last 100 years to give hope and to share Jesus. And instead, the church added to the storm. More people heard about our political perspectives and our medical opinions than about the God that we claim to love and serve. COVID didn't divide the church divided itself. We have sacrificed the message of the cross and replaced it with heated opinions, angry outbursts, and temper tantrums that rival that of a preschooler when their toy is taken away. Shame on the church and shame on us. In his book, When the Game is Over, It All Goes Back to the Box, John Ortberg wrote, "A man is being tailgated by a woman who is in a hurry. He comes to an intersection, and when the light turns yellow, he hits the brakes. The woman behind him goes ballistic. She honks her horn at him. She yells her frustration in no uncertain terms. She rants and she gestures. While she is in mid-rant, someone taps on the window. She looks up and she sees a policeman. He invites her out of her car and takes her to the station where she is searched and fingerprinted and put into a cell. After a couple of hours, she's released, and the arresting officer gives her her personal effects back, saying, "I'm very sorry for the mistake, ma'am. I pulled up behind your car while you were blowing your horn, using bad gestures and bad language. And I noticed the 'What Would Jesus Do' bumper sticker, the 'Choose Life' license plate holder, the 'Follow Me to Sunday School' window sign, the Christian fish emblem on your trunk, and I naturally assumed that you had stolen the car." He goes on to say, "The world gets pretty tired of people who have Christian bumper stickers on their cars, Christian fish signs on their trunks, Christian books on their shelves, Christian stations on their radios, Christian jewelry around their necks, Christian videos for their kids, and Christian magazines for the coffee tables, but don't actually have the life of Jesus in their bones or the love of Jesus in their hearts." See, there are many warning signs in the Bible about anger and losing your temper. I'll give you a few. Psalm 37:8 says, "Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret. It only leads to evil. For those who are evil will be destroyed, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land." James 1:19 and 20 says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." Ecclesiastes 7:9 says, "Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the laps of fools." Maybe as I read those verses, you are remembering a time over the last year that you lost your temper. The reality is some of you don't have to go back very far. Not only did you violate the scripture commands, you damaged your testimony, and you made yourself look foolish. And now you wonder, can I ever come back from this? Will people ever respect me again? How about God? Does he still have a plan and a purpose for me? Or am I just damaged goods? Today we look at a story of the most famous man in all of the Bible. God used him in remarkable ways and used him in incredible miracles. But before that happened, he had a horrible temper-filled moment that almost destroyed him. So let me back up and set the scene. There was a new Pharaoh in Egypt. The Israelites were captives and slaves, but their number was growing dramatically. Pharaoh was concerned that the Israelites would turn against them in war, so he concocted a plan to reduce their number. Pharaoh instructed the midwives who helped the Hebrew women give birth to kill every single boy. He said, if it's a baby girl, let them live, but if it's a boy, kill it then and there. That way, the Hebrew people will have no future generations. But see, the midwives were trained to deliver babies, not kill them. And so they ignored the order, and they let all the babies live. Pharaoh grew more concerned because something had to be done. And then Pharaoh gave this order to all the people. Every boy that is born, you must throw them into the Nile, but let the girls live. Since the midwives wouldn't do it, Pharaoh empowered the people, all the people, to kill all of the Hebrew boys, telling them, if you see a Hebrew baby boy, just grab them and throw them in the river. See, if the baby didn't drown, then they would be quickly eaten by crocodiles. Can you imagine the panic among the Hebrew people? What kind of evil ruler would allow babies to just be tossed into a river? Now, a man of the house of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. And ordinarily, that would be great news. But in this case, having a son was bad news because as soon as he was discovered, he would be killed. When he saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him, and she coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds on the bank of the Nile. See, in a desperate attempt to save her child, the baby's mother made a waterproof basket and put him in the river And remember, this is the same river that Pharaoh ordered people to throw the babies into. See, the Nile River wasn't a safe place to put a baby. There were crocodiles and wild animals. See, we read that story, but it doesn't really describe the emotion. So I remember when Tina and I left Josiah at the babysitter's for the very first time. I pretty much held it together until it was time for me to leave. And then I cried so hard that I couldn't even drive. I just sat there in the driveway and cried for like 10 or 15 minutes. See, that was my son that I was leaving behind. Now, I wasn't leaving Josiah forever. I would see him in just a short 9 hours. Josiah wasn't floating down a crocodile-infested river. He was going to the babysitter's. But see, this mom put her 3-month-old son in the basket and she walked down to the river, and she had been weeping uncontrollably as she knelt down and placed the basket at the edge of the water. His sister stood at the distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. So was that a coincidence? I don't think so. Right? Pharaoh's daughter just happened to be walking down the river at just that exact time and just happened to see the basket among the reeds. She opened it and she saw the baby. He was crying and she felt sorry for them. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. See, remember, it was her father who gave the order to kill all the Hebrew baby boys. Pharaoh's daughter was supposed to obey her dad and throw the baby in the river. The whole time, the baby's little sister was watching. When Pharaoh's daughter found the baby, the sister ran up to her. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. And the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. See, only God. Right? Mom took her baby to the river and she said her final goodbyes, and now she was being paid to care for her own baby. Right? Some of you right now are saying, "Man, I wish someone would pay me to raise my kids." See, God returned her child to her. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him up out of the water." So Moses moved out of his mother's house and into Pharaoh's palace. Moses didn't have to worry about being killed. Instead, he was the loved grandson of the Pharaoh. The historian Josephus tells us that because Pharaoh had no son or heir, Moses was raised to one day assume the throne and become the next Pharaoh. While other Hebrews were captive slaves, Moses had a life of privilege, wealth, and power. One day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. See, he knew he was a Hebrew because he grew up in his mother's house. Moses had heard the stories about the slave labor and the cruelty of the Egyptians. And one day he decided to see for himself what was being done to his people. And while he was there, he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Now, the word here used for beating speaks of a violent attack, a beating that would almost assuredly end in death. The cruelty was so great that Moses couldn't just stand by and watch. His resentment turned to anger, and in a fit of temper, his anger became action. See, the injustice was real. Something needed to be done. Remember, Moses was the son of Pharaoh, or the grandson of Pharaoh. He had position and influence and wealth and power. No doubt Moses could have shouted, and the beating would have stopped. He could have summoned a soldier and had the Egyptian arrested. But see, punishing the Egyptian wasn't enough for Moses. He was angry. Glancing this way and that way, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian, and he hid him in the sand. See, Moses interrupted the beating with the beating of his own. In a fit of rage, he viciously beat the Egyptian to death. See, that cruel Egyptian deserved to be punished. What he did was wrong. But Moses lost his temper and committed murder. Realizing what he had done, Moses tried to cover up his sin by burying the body in the sand. The next day, he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" See, it was a violent fight. Seeing that someone was going to get killed, Moses intervened. The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me just as you did the Egyptian?" See, Moses' sin prevented him from addressing the sin of others. When he took things into his own hands, he lost influence and he lost the right to lead. When you act on your anger, you don't just lose your temper, you lose your influence. See, there are two schools of thought. One says, I've got the credibility to address it because I have personally gone through it. I've made that mistake. The other way of thinking says, I've got credibility to address it because I stuck to God's plan. I didn't fall into the trap. I'll let you decide. So, who would you rather get marriage advice from? Someone who's had multiple failed marriages or someone who's been married for 50 years? Who would you rather get financial advice from? Someone who's declared bankruptcy several times and is currently broke, or someone who has a successful business? Who would you listen to when corrected about your fighting? The guy who killed the Egyptian in anger, or the person who's able to control their temper? See, Moses lost his influence when he decided to take things into his own hands and follow his own plan. Then Moses was afraid and taught, "What I did must have become known." See, Moses thought no one had seen him and that he had covered his tracks. He murdered the bad guy, he hid the body in the sand, and he got away with it. But someone saw and someone told. People were talking about the murder, and it made it all the way to Pharaoh. When Pharaoh heard about this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. From there, and grandson to just a common criminal. Moses lost his temper, and it cost him everything. His home, his adopted family, his position in his kingdom. It cost him everything. So I believe Moses had already been anointed by God as the deliverer of his people. But I can't help but wonder if Moses hadn't lost his temper and tried to take things into his own hands, would the deliverance of the Israelite people, would it have happened a different way? Would Moses have become the ruler and simply released his people to return to their homeland? But see, because of his sin, we'll never know. See, Moses didn't stop God's plan for his life, but as we'll learn, it did put it on hold for about 40 years. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness taking care of sheep instead of leading God's people. Because of sin, because Moses took things into his own hands, God's plan for his life was delayed. Now, if the story ended right there, I'm pretty sure that you would be convinced not to lose your temper. You would vow to never take things into your own hands, but to fully trust in God's plan. You would be warned, and hopefully you would avoid the same mistake. But remember, this series is about comebacks. I want to quickly show you the rest of the story. If you've lost your temper, if you took things into your own hands, and because of your anger, you've missed God's plan, I want you to stay tuned. Listen, God still has a plan for you. If in the last year and a half you have made a fool of yourself with your anger, maybe with your post, with getting mad about things that are earthly and not eternal, pay attention. Fast forward about 40 years or so, Moses was around 80 years old. He was now married, had 2 kids, and was making a living as a shepherd. He had made a comfortable new life for himself. But he wasn't with his people. He hadn't seen his family in years. We pick up the story in Exodus chapter 3. Moses was tending to the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire and it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I am concerned about their suffering, so I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way that the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? See, Moses' heart dropped when he heard that he was supposed to go to Pharaoh and he was supposed to go back to Egypt. He had to go back to the place of his greatest failure. He had to go back to the place where he didn't belong. He had to go back to the place that he left in devastating shame. See, when you're asked to revisit the place of your greatest failure, it can be easy to run away from it and stay in the new place of comfort. But see, God had a plan to redeem Moses, to redeem his people's suffering, and to rescue them both. And God said, I will be with you. And this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, What is his name? Then what shall I tell him? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you're to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. What a remarkable comeback. The guy who short-circuited God's plan because of his temper had a life-changing encounter with God and was sent back to Egypt to free his people. Moses' temper-filled moment of rage, it cost him influence and position, wealth and power. It delayed God's plans for his life, but it didn't stop God's plan. I want to fast forward one more time, this time to Exodus chapter 34. Following God's plan and relying on God's power, Moses successfully led the Israelites out of captivity in Egypt. Now, that is many, many years of history in one sentence. And Moses then went up to the mountain and he had a face-to-face encounter with God. Moses, the guy who lost his temper. Moses, the guy who killed someone in a tempered rage, was now one-on-one, face-to-face with the living God. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken to the Lord. Talk about a comeback, right? Moses had another dramatic encounter with God. It was obvious to everyone that Moses had been in the presence of the Lord. Now let me go back to the start of my message. See, the church in America has lost influence, position, and because of irrational anger. Many of you here and many of you watching online have diminished your testimony because of your temper. Some of you have ranted and raved with anger at the very people that you're praying will come to Jesus. That's embarrassing and it's shameful. I thought about giving you 5 ways to control your anger. I thought about giving you 10 steps to recover after you've lost your temper. That would be good. I think I'll do that another time, though. There are certainly some things that you need to do to make it right to those who have been the object of your irrational behavior. But rather than go through the list, I want to give you the first and the most important step to a comeback. See, if you've lost your temper, if you've struggled with anger, if you've embarrassed yourself and you've hurt your testimony, do like Moses did and get in the presence of God. See, it's in God's presence is where his comeback started. It started at the burning bush, and then it happened on the mountaintop at Mount Sinai. See, in God's presence, you can be fully restored. If you'll spend enough time in God's presence, your character will change. Your heart will soften others. Listen, your face may not glow, but if it did, that'd be awesome, right? It may not glow, but your life will radiate God's glory. Other people will be able to tell that you have been in his presence. So what do you do when you sense anger rising up in you? Instead of running to fight or hurrying to share your opinion, which, by the way, people don't care about. I'll get back to my script, stepped on some toes. Instead of doing those things, run to God's presence. Allow God to minister to you. Listen, God still has a plan for you, and he still has a purpose for you. You'll discover his purpose and his plan for your life when you get in his presence. See, I think sometimes we get in too big of a hurry. The pressure of time pushes against us. It seems like we spend a lot of time on a lot of things, but we don't spend enough time in God's presence. So today I want to do that. I don't want you to leave. We're not done with service. We're going to spend some time in the presence of God today. There's no rules. You can sit, you can stand, you can kneel, you can come up to the altar area if you want. But see, we're going to spend time in the presence of God, and we're going to allow his nature to affect our nature. We're going to allow his character to change our character. And here's the reality. In God's presence, all the stress, all the pressure, all the heartache, all the junk in your life will begin to wash away. Lord Jesus, we welcome your presence in this place. God, we still ourselves this morning. Lord, we aren't in a hurry. Lord, we just want to be in your presence. Lord, would you change us? Where we've been angry and bitter, would you soften our hearts? God, where we've been harsh, Lord, would you bring gentleness? Would you touch us so that it would be obvious to others that we've been in your presence?